Mr. President, thank you for convening this resumed 10th emergency session of the General Assembly in response to the request of the Arab and OIC groups. Mr. President, we are witnessing a human tragedy of epic proportions unfold in front of our eyes. Israel's campaign of bombardment and airstrikes that has now continued for 20 days has killed 7,000 helpless Palestinians, half of them children, and wounded 17,000 others. Entire families and neighborhoods have been wiped out. The Palestinians are being bombed indiscriminately and without mercy or compunction. Their essential lifelines, water, food, fuel, have been cut off. Over 1 million Palestinians are internally displaced in Gaza. And even those who are displaced cannot hide from the Israeli bombs which rain upon them. 40% of Gaza City has been destroyed. And yet, the Israeli onslaught continues. It has also spread, almost without note, to the West Bank. 37 staff members of the UN Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, in Palestine have tragically lost their lives, many with their families and their homes gone. 40 UNRWA buildings and warehouses have been damaged by Israeli airstrikes. As noted by one UN official working in Palestine, in Gaza, the largest open-air prison in the world, it has today become the graveyard of a population trapped between war, siege, and deprivation. Mr. President, Pakistan strongly and unequivocally condemns Israeli airstrikes and the systematic and barbaric crimes against the Palestinians, particularly the attacks on schools and residential buildings and even hospitals, such as the Ali Baptist Hospital, where hundreds of sick and injured civilians, men, women, and children, were killed. These Israeli attacks on civilians, civilian objects, and infrastructure, blockade of water, food, and fuel, as well as the forced transfer of people from the occupied territory, are flagrant violations of international humanitarian law and amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Indeed, Mr. President, what we are witnessing on our television screens, what the people of Palestine in Gaza are suffering, may amount to a veritable genocide. As our Secretary General has warned, and as we can all perceive, the situation, I quote, is growing more dire by the hour, unquote. The war, quote, risks spiraling throughout the region, unquote. In this moment, the Secretary General has said, it is vital to be clear on principles, starting with the fundamental principle of respecting and protecting civilians, unquote. Mr. President, we are repelled by the crude and disrespectful Israeli response to the Secretary General's circumspect and valid views. The General Assembly should collectively reject these insulting remarks and reaffirm our full confidence in the Secretary General. Mr. President, as human beings, we must be appalled at the magnitude of the suffering of the helpless Palestinian civilians, especially the children and women. I am sure all of us are also appalled at the vicious and callous way that the Palestinians are being slaughtered by cowardly aerial bombardment and long-range artillery. They are being crucified, not by a militant organization, but by a government which claims to be democratic. And we must also be appalled by those who, by blocking the call for a ceasefire in the Security Council, have enabled the continuation of the Israeli slaughter of innocents. It is the hope of the Arab and OIC countries that the General Assembly, acting under the Uniting for Peace process, will succeed where the Security Council has failed. The co-sponsors of the draft resolution in document EA/ES 10/L25 seek three objectives. One, an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. The Israeli killing machine must be stopped in Gaza and the West Bank. Two, the flow of sufficient and sustained humanitarian assistance into Gaza to preserve lives and prevent further suffering of innocent Palestinians. And three, to ensure that the Palestinian population of Gaza is not further displaced within or outside Gaza. Mr. President, it is shocking that even these largely humanitarian objectives, set out in the most circumspect language, have been opposed by some in the General Assembly. Even the call for a ceasefire has faced objections. This position is unjustifiable, legally and morally. Furthermore, an amendment has been moved to insert condemnatory language that is one-sided, discriminatory, and legally contentious. If equity is to be served, we would need to insert language to reflect the realities of this war in a balanced and clear manner. One, to reaffirm the right of the Palestinian people under international law to struggle by all possible means, including armed struggle, to secure their freedom from foreign occupation and exercise their right to self-determination. And two, to strongly and unequivocally condemn Israel's barbarous and indiscriminate bombing of Palestinian civilians and protected objects and sites in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Without such balancing language, we will vote resolutely against the one-sided Canadian amendment. Mr. President, in the context of this war, consideration should also be given to some form of an accountability mechanism. The crimes that are being committed cannot go unpunished. We have several recent precedents of accountability mechanisms from which to choose. And finally, for the future, we need to consider ways to prevent a recurrence of this slaughter. The OIC foreign ministers have proposed the deployment of a protection force to safeguard Palestinian civilians in the Gaza and perhaps also in the West Bank. We should give serious consideration to this. Mr. President, it is only once this war is brought to an end once the killing stops, that we can turn to find a durable solution. The resolution which we have presented seeks to do just that, to stop the killing, to stop the war, and turn back to find a durable political solution. I urge all member states to vote for our resolution. I urge them all to vote against the one-sided Canadian amendment. Thank you.
This has been the Nod News Network. Transmission complete.